Hi, I'm Ashley Swartz, Dean of the Beat faculty and Furious CEO. This is the last class of the semester. Welcome. This is Beat You. We've been doing this for the last 9 weeks. This is our 9th class. And, summer's here, so class is out, the semester's out. I would love this to be a field day, like water balloons and potato sack races. If we could all be together, I think that would be a much more fun theme. But we're still at home, a lot of us, getting out more and more every day. But I think it's a great way for us to sort of end the last session by talking about connected TV today. So today's class is actually the result of a request and a comment on one of our previous classes this semester from Sean, who's an MBA candidate. Actually, I think he graduated by now from Cornell. So congrats, Sean. He asked if we could talk about the impact on supply, television supply overall with connected TV, which I thought was a great sort of topic. I know I've spent so much time talking about traditional television because that's been so greatly disrupted by this COVID reset. And I think it's fair we spend some time on these growth mediums and these growth platforms. So today we're going to talk about how connected TV or CTV has flourished, no surprise, as a result of COVID, and then what that means overall for television holistically. So just CTV is a catchphrase, right? It includes a lot of things. That includes built-in smart TV interfaces, standalone streaming devices like Roku, Amazon, Chromecast, and Apple TV, as well as connected video game platforms and Blu-ray players. According to Leichman Research Group, eMarketer, and others, because it's pretty consistent across the board, the use of connected TV devices in the US keeps growing. So Leichman says that about 80% of homes in the US now have at least one connected TV device. That the level of 80% means that about 96 million households have at least one connected TV device compared to 120.6 million Nielsen households or linear television households. This is up from the 74% level it was in 2018 and only 24% in 2010. So you can see how fast this has been growing. There are about 400 million devices themselves in the US, right, in US TV homes, and that's up from 250 million 4 years ago. So we've almost seen it doubled in 4 years. 64% of the homes have 3 or more devices, and the average is about 4.1 devices per connected TV household. Roku and Amazon Fire are the leaders with about 40 million devices sort of each, according to these companies. 40% of adults in US TV households watch video on a TV via a connected device daily versus 1% in 2010. So in 10 years, we have gone from 1% of the US TV households to 40%. And we know that COVID has absolutely put a hockey stick even more in that viewing behavior and in that time spent. According to Nielsen's most recent audience report, which was in the first quarter of 2019, and this was so it's prior to COVID, right? The average American was spending 5 hours, 50 minutes a day watching video, 20% of which was on SVOD or subscription video on demand platforms, which have no ads. So although in sort of 2020 with COVID and then economic hardship, we've seen this is still increased, but we've seen more pressure, economic pressure, right? And that's put wind in the sails of AVOD or advertising video on demand services. Many premium video providers are now offering advertising video on demand services or AVOD as an alternative to SVOD. So probably both of them is what they're actually taking to market, because much of America, as well as sort of the rest of the world, are really concerned about money spent and dollars and sort of this average household spend, which is the metric that we use to look at growth for cable, internet, and then ultimately streaming devices and services. Time spent on traditional TV continues to shift to connected TV. But what does this mean for advertising, right? That's the big question. And what's this mean for advertising volume or supply, which was Sean's question initially? And then what does it mean for actual spend, sort of dollars, right? Will every dollar lost in traditional television because of shrinking audiences be gained in connected television? Let's look at the numbers and sort of do the analysis. Let's start with dollars, right? eMarket upped their estimate for 2021 to be more than 10 billion for connected television, right? That is from about 6.9 billion or 7 billion in 2019. And it was only expected to be, I believe prior to COVID, the forecast was 8.8 billion. So concurrently, TV this year is expected to decline by about sort of 22%, right? So that's about 10 billion or 12 billion in total absolute dollars, which is about the same as the connected TV estimated value as a total marketplace and spend in 2021. But given that the delta year over year, you're seeing basically what is a 30% sort of swing or a little over about $3 billion swing upwards in about 24 months in connected television in absolute dollars and spend, and you're seeing a 10 to 12 billion decline in linear television. So it's not one for one, right? We are seeing a greater rate of decline in absolute dollar spend in linear television than we are seeing a greater rate of increase in absolute spend in connected television. So it begs the question, right? With all this time spent, what does this mean for advertising supply? And it's not a simple answer. So what we're going to do is we're going to deconstruct it and really understand sort of unit for unit what that means for each of them and ultimately the value of those units. We're going to start with just volume. So let's start with ad load. We've discussed this before in a few sessions, actually. We've talked about ad load and its definition. I just want to remind everybody that at one point in time in linear television's history, ad load was something that was government regulated. It was sort of an anti-competition issue where, they wanted everyone's supply to be equal, right? That's now controlled by programmers, and that has been deregulated. So why does ad load matter? Well, it's a simple signal to noise ratio. And, most of you many of you hear me use that metaphor a lot. I love it. Love it. And it is appropriate here. So with less ads per hour of TV programming time, the more likely an ad is to be seen and to be memorable and recalled and have resonance, right? And then it's most importantly more valuable to a seller. But because audiences are declining, concurrently, you have audience decline, which means less viewers, which means less inventory volume available for sale or inventory supply. And then ultimately, if you concurrently reduce the ad load, that's another parameter by which you are reducing supply as well. So, there's an elasticity curve there about the value of the inventory, given that there's less ad load, but then the decreasing volume that occurs at the same time. And that's the biggest challenge and why ultimately managing yield for sellers of both CTV and linear are so tough. Ultimately, audiences have been shrinking on TV, and we know that. And ad loads have been creeping up to compensate. That's a truth. So the historical sort of ad load, the metric, the bar we all use in the industry to refer to it is basically historically 8 minutes per hour, 8 minutes per 22 minutes of television programming. And then that means 16 minutes per hour. And let's just be really clear. So typical ad format for linear television is a 30-second spot. So 16 minutes per hour is 32 ad spots sold by different players in the value chain, right? So NBC has been, and Linda Yaccarino and her team have always been, first, right? They've been innovators. And they came out in 2019 as a leader in advertising and said they were going to reduce their ad loads by 10%. So what we ended up seeing at the end of 2019 is that where NBC came in with, a $10 billion sort of top line ad business at 14.3 minutes per hour on average of ads, whereas you had other folks, specifically A&E, Discovery, and Viacom that were exceeding 17 minutes per hour of ads. So you have quite a spectrum now that this has been deregulated. And clearly there's a lot of analysis to understand how to maximize top line revenue for a seller, given the decreasing number of viewers that are actually starting to, sort of continue to rear its ugly head on linear television platforms. So having learned this lesson, we've seen in connected television that distributors with the largest audiences have learned from the mistakes of linear and gone to market with maximum ad load per hour guarantees. So Scott Rosenberg, who's the general manager of the Roku platform, told Ad Exchanger in August of 2019 that they are guaranteeing to keep their ad load to 8 minutes or less per streaming hour of content. That is less than half that of linear television. And they're using that as a sort of gauntlet to lay down to go directly against linear for each dollar of sort of ad spend there on that platform of TV buyers. Hulu has an ad-supported subscription version that is $5.99 a month that has about 58 million subscribers, right? This is as of 2019. And the ad experience is important to consider because given that ads they subsidize, not fund the subscriptions of their viewers. It's really important, and advertising itself is very sensitive for that reason for Hulu. So they don't specify ad load per hour, but they do guarantee that no ad pod, that's how long the duration of an ad break is in streaming content or in linear content. They guarantee that an ad pod will never exceed 90 seconds, right? So given that the need is to keep the ad experience, as Peter Naylor, their former head of sales, said at the time, non-intrusive, that's their goal. And then ultimately that ends up resulting likely in smaller ad loads. So we can assume that the ad loads per hour available for sale are less than that of linear television as well. So two of the big guys, Roku, Hulu, we suggest that the total time per hour, total minutes per hour of streaming programming actually is less than linear and significantly less at that. So when we're comparing apples to apples, there are probably less 30-second ad units for sale in an hour of supported streaming content on connected TV platforms than there would be for linear television platforms. Just 1-to-1, 30 seconds. Let's talk about ad format now, right? This is something we don't really talk about in linear. I mean, we've seen sort of 30 seconds and 15s, and Fox did a hot minute experiment of 6 seconds. But ultimately, both linear TV and CTV have leaned into new ad formats. That's true, right? Digital or CTV just has a lot more flexibility and more opportunities in their arsenal to play with formats. So we see many more 15-second commercials on linear, and connected TV platforms have leveraged their digital infrastructure to enable short-form video formats like 6-second ads, 10-second ads, and also to enable interactive formats like Hulu, and then new formats to convert purchases within video experiences like YouTube, right? So even though the absolute time may vary per hour of programming, the number of ad units can be tweaked by adjusting formats. So you can have a minute break, right? And you can have 2 30 seconds, you could have 4 15s, or you could have, 3 15s and one sort of 25-second. There's a multitude of options when it comes to digital because they have the flexibility to deliver a multitude of smaller format video ad units, right? So the value of the inventory changes based on the format, right? It's pretty much straightforward that the longer the ad is in time duration, the more it's worth. But when we look at highly interactive formats or highly interactive ads, et cetera, those that can convert to purchase, we see CPM premiums on digital platforms that are unheard of in television, particularly if we start to sell those ad units on a performance basis. So a click through, a per complete, a conversion, right? When we actually see an opportunity to drive much greater premiums than sort of CPM to CPM that we already see on CTV versus linear, even greater multiples of premiums when we're looking at performance-based currencies or ways of packaging inventory. Let's talk about targeting. The topic du jour. So remember that connected television has all the capabilities of digital advertising, but it's a premium experience of TV. That's what makes it kind of awesome sauce. So the ability to leverage data, both the advertiser's first party data and audience data the seller may have, as well as then potentially other sort of data sets to target specific viewers. This is absolutely increasing the value of connected TV platforms, right? And the value of video overall by a significant amount. Linear TV sellers that do sell addressable today see 10, 20, sometimes 40x premiums for addressable impressions. The ability to target inventory or impressions rather for a television seller has been the holy grail for a long time. It's what we've referred to as addressable TV. And linear sellers have been trying to gain momentum to make addressable something every advertiser wants in their media mix. And ironically, connected TV and its incredible sort of growth trajectory now may end up being the tail that wags the dog in this whole addressable conversation, right? So it may also be what makes addressable a meaningful line of business for TV sellers. When using data to target specific customers, oftentimes advertisers will work with multiple sellers to reach as many of sort of a target audience as possible, given the difference of another metaphor I use a lot, fishing with a net versus fishing with a line, right? You got to drop more lines in the water if you're fishing with a line, if you want to ensure you catch enough for dinner. And the same goes with advertising, right? Up funnel reach buying on linear television versus if you want to eat yogurt eating moms in Duluth in the market for a minivan, you probably have to spread your bets a little bit further to make sure you get as many yogurt eating moms as needed to drive your purchase performance you want, right? So this gets us to another holy grail holistically, just overall. We talk about this for TV, and that is unduplicated reach. And, a capability of digital advertising is often the ability to confirm that an ad has been delivered to a single device and to sort of match that device, right? Privacy in place, et cetera, but to confirm it was delivered to a specific device. This is great when a brand wants to target, right? But for big consumer brands like Coke or Pepsi that often want to reach as much reach as possible because they are what we call up funnel advertisers. So for some of you, this is old hat, the marketing funnel, but Coke and Pepsi, they care about recall and recognition of their brand, right? Not necessarily intent to purchase as much, but it's really just about brand recall because they are advertising at a brand level. Traditional linear TV offers the greatest value for their dollar because of its sheer reach, because they want tonnage. Digital platforms, even the ones that have reach like Hulu and Roku are more expensive for sort of apples to apples comparative reach. Their average CPMs are often significantly higher than linear, and that carries through even when you're just straight trying to place, which is not so common on these digital connected TV platforms, a straight reach buy. So this has been the case to date where premium linear TV content distributed over the top has been supply constrained, which has delivered these higher CPMs. And the illiquidity or supply constraint of what is ultimately linear television content being syndicated on over the top platforms has retained and kept this artificially, well, I say artificially, but this high CPM as a result of not having as much supply available to meet demand. Even as supply is increased, we have seen those CPMs actually, and those CPM premiums pretty much hold constant. So this hasn't changed as much since, linear TV audiences are declining either, and it's because high quality inventory still remains illiquid, right? A NBC primetime program that is syndicated past the C7 window on Peacock is different than a YouTube short form, web only sort of series produced by an independent content creator. It's just different and has different perceived value to buyers and advertisers. Some more, to be very clear. So content recognition technologies like ACR, which are now native to most smart TV platforms, enable CTV sellers to identify if TV is used to watch linear programming, right? So they can actually identify if there's an input from a linear TV set-top box and listen for what that stream is and identify it via watermarks. This capability has allowed companies like Roku to package and sell unduplicated reach to attract traditional TV buyers and even large brand advertisers to connected television. So in this year's upfronts, Roku provided and took to market an unduplicated reach guarantee for buyers that used a database across multiple smart TV platforms that relied on ACR to deliver. One thing that's really important is that, we see because fish with a net, fish with a line, when you're targeting, you need to make sure that you have as much sort of, beginning inventory as possible so that, when you start with approachable audience of 50 million and you actually target those yogurt eating moms in 3 markets, you don't end up with 20 moms, right? So programmatic in connected television is meaningful because they aggregate volume and they aggregate inventory. And ultimately, you need to be able to aggregate supply in order to be able to maximize reach when you're using data to target audiences. So this gets very complicated because we see this undercurrent, not unlike we've seen in television increasingly today and other, with companies like Google and Facebook, of particularly platforms trying to create their own walled gardens, their own proprietary tech stacks. They're trying to create all the apps and app providers within their CTV sort of ecosystem to actually be sort of self-contained, right? And so the ability, you may be able to dedupe reach from linear television to a specific platform, but you may not be able to dedupe reach from one connected TV platform or ecosystem to another. So this construct of walled gardens is omnipresent across the entirety of the ecosystems, both digital and linear or traditional media within the advertising business. Let's talk about the ad tax. We don't talk about that in linear television. No. So because CTV is digital and it's targeted and it requires verification and creative optimization and all those things that are, expected and sort of just table stakes for buyers within digital advertising, there are many more players in the value chain, right? And in the tech stack. And so a lot of CTV inventory is sold programmatic and in programmatic marketplaces, and that requires that even more greater of a VIG for every dollar spent goes to those folks in the middle. So the additional number of players in the value chain for CTV means a greater ad tax. The question is, who pays for that? I mean, there are higher sort of CPMs, but how much of that is going to, sort of technology players in the middle or value added folks in the middle that are creating marketplaces, et cetera? Is it the buyer that pays for it? Is it the seller? Is it distributed? The additional cost of delivery of CTV is real and it's clearly shared across the value chain, right? So it requires that in order to be able to sort of look at apples to apples, it requires an ROI analysis as to the increased return to a buyer or an advertiser on CTV platforms versus the increased cost of inventory or impression for impression in those platforms, right? And then there's also a higher cost of doing business. So, there's an additional cost for FTE resources because of the number of sort of variables in a digital buy. Typically, there are more FTE resources. There's greater reporting and reconciliation and accounting and all of those things, the administrivia, if you will, that just makes digital advertising overall, particularly CTV, because it is digital, more expensive than traditional mediums like linear. Another word we don't talk about a lot in linear television or phrase, ad fraud. One thing that has plagued digital platforms with CTV being no exception is fraud. So in April of this year, the largest CTV ad fraud scheme in history was uncovered by a company called White Ops, which is an ad verification company. So there was a report that was published in Marketing Dive at its peak in January. A bot network scheme called Ice Bucket impersonated more than 2 million people and generated more than 1.9 billion ad requests, which equaled 28% of the volume on programmatic platforms for connected television during that period. Ice Bucket counterfeited more than 300 publishers. And these were big guys too. No one was safe. This isn't just like second, third tier. These were big dogs as well. And it tricked advertisers into thinking that real people were seeing their ads. So instead of real viewers sitting behind a screen like this, the viewing activity was artificially created with these bots that impersonated views and activities of human beings. So White Ops identified and then blocked the Ice Bucket attack, but it's still sort of ongoing, right? And some of the numbers are just staggering if you think about it. So the most frequently spoofed devices included Roku, so 46% of the fake traffic. Samsung, Tizen, smart TVs were 20%. Google TV was 21%, and then Android mobile devices were 6.1% per White Ops, based on that distribution of the, the sort of fake 1.9 billion ad requests. It's just a reminder: this shit doesn't happen on TV. Doesn't happen. We talked about ad fraud in any of the linear TV sort of conversations. Risk reward, right? So if we don't know if the TV supply that is available as a result of growth is real human traffic, how can we have confidence in the CTV supply at all? And that's really the challenge. That's really the hard part. And maybe that just means that CTV inventory is, for the short term, is going to have to be bought direct from sellers, right? From the actual programmers or content owners or distributors. And those that are in marketplaces like programmatic, we need to be a little bit skeptical about in the future. I'm not really sure what that means, but we do have to ask that question if we're taking an eyes wide open perspective on investment in CTV, particularly when comparing it to potentially cannibalizing dollars from our linear spend from the buy side of the industry's perspective. My perspective, there's only one answer that, that is required for buyers, right? And that is the juice worth the squeeze? So connected TV right now requires more work to plan. You have to develop more creative variants, ultimately to buy and deliver. And then there's undeniably, more inventory. We know that, although there is the input of this new supply, the impact of this new supply rather on linear TV is diminished because of the lack of maturity and ultimately the risk and lack of trustworthiness of the supply itself, right? So my thought is that, my belief rather, is that at this point in time, connected TV is most valuable if it's used as a complement, or whether it's direct reach extension for up funnel buys for very large advertisers that want to just get as much tonnage as possible and look to platforms that, tend to skew for users or subscribers that don't actually have traditional linear television subscriptions or set-top boxes in their household, right? Or alternatively, in a post-COVID era, potentially it is for, advertisers that buy traditional television, particularly from local broadcast or cable, and buy it by geography, and then use those same geographical parameters to target on connected TV platforms. And then most importantly, use that targeting because they have to sort of customize or cater their messages based on where we are in the arc of reopening in a specific geography. So QSR, for example, I brought this up a couple weeks ago. If you're a quick serve restaurant, do you want to call attention at the speediness of your drive-through or the sort of curbside delivery and mobile app that you're making available to consumers when the restaurant itself is closed? Or do you want to speak to, the sort of the safety, the cleanliness, the standards that you're enabling social distancing while not compromising an in-house dining experience, right? It depends. That would be geographical at this point, given this new normal for us. And that's where CTV and its ability to target by geography could be very valuable. In the end, all that most brands want is a human to see an entire screen for 30 seconds. And that's not non-trivial in the context of this conversation. So, we've seen that it's not dollar for dollar, that every dollar lost in TV ads is going to be made up in CTV. And it's not one for one, that every 30-second spot as a result of declining audience will be, will manifest in connected TV platforms in some way, particularly given that cannibalization in television viewing is very much so still highly driven and consumed by subscription VOD streaming services, which don't have any ads at all. So that will continue to keep connected TV and AVOD ad values high. But if we don't address the issues of fraud and we don't reduce the cost of delivery, we'll still continue to do this dance of the glass being half full versus half empty and have this conversation over and over again until this space continues to mature. So I don't know, 30 seconds, the whole screen by a human doesn't feel like a lot. I really don't think it's all that complicated, but that's me. So I wish everyone a blessed, safe, and peaceful summer. Light to all, love to all, peace to all. And I'm so deeply grateful for the last sort of 3 months that we've spent together. And I hope to see you again in the fall because we're going to do more of this. So blessings.